thank you very much to Matthew and Alpha Laboratories for inviting me to come and just give a little overview on FIT and whether it's suitability to practice. James has already done a wonderful introduction, so it's going to make my job a lot easier. I'm going to be certainly less articulate than him, but hopefully a little bit more controversial. Because I have very strong views, particularly with NICE and its introduction or rather its interpretation of this. Anyway. Okay, so I'm Ramesh Arasaradnam, and I just work down the road in Coventry and Warwick. So just to reiterate what James has mentioned already, in terms of these are patients who were interested with lower gastrointestinal symptoms. They present with a myriad of these things, as you can see here. And this nice systematic review in 2010 in the BMJ suggested that, whilst we are interested in picking up the cancer, but there are also other pathology that we need to think about, also with a significant overlap. And this leaves the clinician with a significant conundrum as to how do you actually tease out the ones that actually need sorting out, i.e. the cancers picking up quickly, as opposed to the others with the still significant but yet benign conditions, which could wait a few more weeks perhaps before we get down to making that diagnosis. You all know this in terms of cancer, but specifically colon cancer, but it is quite common. In fact, it's the commonest cancer among non-smokers in the UK, actually. And like most cancers, it has a very strong age preponderance. So that the older you become, your risk does increase, as it does with other solid organ tumors. But interestingly, also young people can be affected. I mean, we all can share stories of picking up cancers in the late 30s, early 40s as well. So it's a significant problem, which is why the Department of Health brought in this 3162 pathway, which suggests that we have to be seen and diagnosed within 31 days and certainly have their first course of treatment by 62 days. Hence this whole concept of the 2-week wait clinical pathway was introduced back in 2000. Now here are some facts about it though. In our institution, as a consequence of that, now we are only picking up about 6.7% of cancers. So amongst all the patients coming in through the 2-week wait pathway, with set stipulated symptoms and criteria set by the Department of Health, we will only pick up about 6 to 7 cancers for every 100 patients that are being referred. Generically throughout England, the data suggests it's 4 to 8%, you'll see there on the left. Now Scotland is different because Scotland don't have a 2-week wait system, and we'll come on to that. But certainly the data in England would support that is the figure. As a consequence of that, in our unit, just to pick up those 6 or 7 patients amongst the 100 each 100 that's coming through, we are doing about 1,900 colonoscopies and about 680 scans, CT scans a year. These are wholly specifically for those coming in with lower gastrointestinal symptoms suspected of colon cancer. You can just imagine the burden, leave alone the cost implications of running through these numbers. NICE, in their wisdom, in 2015, the DG12 criteria brought in this concept of using fecal occult blood. My goodness, the confusion that caused was quite mind-boggling, really, because, as you know, they never really stipulated what they had in mind. We'll come back to that. So, but fortunately, there were others that thought, now, what about using fecal immunochemical testing for hemoglobin? Could there be a solution? And I'm sure the previous speakers have already hinted at this first paper by Bob Steele's group in Dundee, looking at both fecal hemoglobin testing and fecal calprotectin. But this was done in, as you know, in Dundee. So Dundee don't have a 2-week wait system. So he managed to convince his primary care colleagues to use the test in primary care. And then from then on work backwards as to determine what their final outcome was. So there was about 750 patients in this cohort, trying to determine its utility to detect mainly bowel cancer. we tried to follow that up in the subsequent cohort in an English population, slightly smaller. We only had about 450 in this group, and what was encouraging was the ability to replicate Bob's findings within a different population. So I'm going to go on now and just expand on that a little bit, because this was part of a largest biomarker study that we were undertaking, really to look at other markers that we had in mind at that time. But because fecal immunochemical testing held such promise, we decided to incorporate this into this famished intercept study. So, as I alluded to earlier, these were patients that came in. They were symptomatic patients fulfilling the criteria stipulated by the Department of Health with lower GI symptoms but suspicion of colorectal cancer. In essence, the 2-week wait pathway, which we're all familiar with. They came in through our dedicated clinics, and we just took only a single stool sample. There was urine and plasma collected, but as I said, that was for part of a different study. And the vast majority underwent either a colonoscopy or a CT colonoscopy. And if for some reason it was deemed that they would not be fit enough for that, then they just had a flexible sigmoidoscopy and a staging CT of sort, really, to pick up any other lesion at that point. Now, one of the things we did was, these patients came up to clinic, so sampling was actually only collected thereafter. So we noticed that in the first sort of 5 to 10% of patients, the compliance was rather poor. And we realized that we needed to help our patients in producing these stool samples. So we used this kit, the FeCall kit, which, as you can see, I'm sorry about the pictures there, but in essence, it provides the patient the ability to actually capture and collect the stool, and therefore enable them then to put it straight into the device, as you can see here on the left, which enables us then to send it off straight to the lab without any concern about quantity and how the sample was obtained. So this was done in the hope that the collection, sampling by the patient, was fairly standardized, because they used this kit, and all of them, as far as we can tell, were reasonably compliant with that. So in terms of the study flow, as I said, this was part of a larger study, but we approached about 1,580 and recruited about 1,016. But those that actually returned the 2 samples, so we gave them separate stool samples, one for fecal calprotectin and the other for fecal immunochemical testing, the FIT test. And that left us with a final number of 612 that eventually returned that. So for both return of both stool markers, our return rate was 67%, and I'll ask you to bear that figure in mind as I go along. So in terms of just giving an overview of the demographics of this population, the median age was 68, as you'd expect, ranging from 20 to 93 years of age with these sort of symptoms. The male to female ratio was rather similar, which has importance there, but also a range of symptoms that we were presenting. So about 2/3 were presenting with change in bowel habit, and about 40% actually with rectal bleeding, which is quite a significant proportion that we were seeing here. And then a myriad of other symptoms from abdominal pain, anemia, and weight loss. So looking at our diagnosis, the final outcome of these cohorts. So remember again, these are symptomatic patients, all comers coming in through the defined criteria by the Department of Health. And we recruited all of them. And we found that 6% is the figure that we already alluded to, had colorectal cancer. We also grouped this group of what we defined as high-grade dysplasia. We treated them as they were as cancer. There was only one patient actually in this cohort, but to form the 37 who had both of these conditions. Adenoma was of particular interest. very similar to what James also was trying to identify, and this amounted to about 17%, and these were all comers, all polyps, all sizes, but they were defined histologically low-grade adenoma. Interestingly, also about 2% you could pick up other important conditions, treatable but benign, such as inflammatory bowel disease, we talked about microscopic colitis, but also about a third with diverticular disease, and this is a big cohort reflecting actually the age range of patients coming through this system. And this is what I found one of the most interesting things, and it comes back to that number James alluded to, 43% coming in through this pathway had a completely normal colonoscopy, which then suggests that there must be some way actually of trying to filter out these patients who are actually currently burdening the symptom, the current pathway of how we investigate such patients. About 14%, as you can see there, had hemorrhoids. So if you look at how the diagnostic utility of using FIT, for example, in the group where we combine high-grade dysplasia and colorectal cancer, just using FIT alone, the sensitivity there is 84%, as you'd expect, but the negative predictive value, 99%, and as you'd expect, the specificity is still in its low 80s. And I'll explain to you why we're focusing on the negative predictive value, because we still believe, and that's my opinion, that it's, when we say we'd like it as a rule-out test, not to say you haven't got cancer, but rather that you probably could be investigated in a different non-urgent pathway, because we all know, seen from the data, you still could miss cancer despite having a negative FIT. And that's important, which is why we don't focus on the sensitivity, because our task here is not to diagnose cancer. I think it's naive to think that a single test testing for the presence of human hemoglobin is going to actually diagnose colorectal cancer. There are loads of other genetic tests. For example, I think there's Exact Science in the US have a 5-panel genetic marker test, and even then the sensitivity is still only in its 80s. So the fact that actually we can have a test just measuring fecal hemoglobin and still bring it at the 80s, I think is still pretty impressive, but it is not going to be sufficient. Don't forget, this is in the symptomatic population, okay? If you were dealing in the screening, the arguments would be very much different in the types of tests that you would use. So similarly, and I share James's opinion that just by adding in fecal calprotectin, you can see, yes, the sensitivity does increase a little bit. Interestingly, the negative predictive value doesn't change at all, and therefore our conclusion here was really the addition of fecal calprotectin really doesn't make much difference. You're just adding in another tier, another test for very little benefit. At this time point, don't forget we did it together. Now, if you were doing it in a subsequent, in a pathway where if the FIT was negative and then you're still following up investigation, that's a different scenario. So the receiver operating curves, as you can see here, for the diagnosis, or rather the exclusion of cancers, as you can see, is 0.9 just for FIT, and even if you combine it, it just goes up to 0.91 really, so very little improvement. And as you can see in the red, calprotectin really isn't really any good compared to FIT. Now, what about the FIT negative cancers that we missed? Because the sensitivity, as you saw, was 84%. So in this cohort of 612, there were 37 cancers and high-grade dysplasias, of which 4 had a FIT value of less than 7. I should have mentioned that this was the cutoff that we used, which was the detectable limit we used, which was 7. So there were 4 patients who had FIT levels less than 7, who had eventually diagnosed with colorectal cancer. Now, they all had a wide age range, but what they had in all common was they all had significant weight loss. All of them had significant weight loss, 2 of whom had also a palpable abdominal mass, which should have actually been picked up. So even before organizing the FIT test, We would argue that if they've presented their first protocol of physician, the history would suggest significant weight loss, and if they examined them, 2 of them would have had a palpable mass that should have initiated urgent investigation, regardless of what the fit result was. And I think that's what James was alluding to, clinical suspicion and acumen by the primary physician. What was also interesting was, if you look on the right, they all were advanced, Duke C and Duke's D, very advanced cancers. And none of them had curative surgery. So 3 of them had surgery, but surgery was not with the intent of cure, it was more for attempt of debulking and part palliation, which was very unfortunate, even for this young chap of 58 who went on straight to have palliative chemotherapy. So our conclusion really here was, and I think the biology is different, as James has alluded to. I think certainly in the advanced cancers, these ones don't bleed, because I think they've proliferated to such a stage that they are unlike, or if they are shedding, it all depends on the timing of when that sample was taken. So our conclusion was, clinically these could have been potentially picked up, and unfortunately from a outcome prognosis point of view, it was pretty advanced at that point. Now, I'm sorry that I came late, so I did hear some of you talk, but I know you probably did cover this in the NG12. I'll have to come clean on this. I'm not a fan of this. I personally think it's complicated for a GP who has 5 minutes to make a decision seeing a patient. If he has to work out who's over 50, have you got weight loss over 60, it's complicated. Even as a gastroenterologist, I would struggle with this, trying to work out where exactly does the patient fit into that. And yes, I think they were trying to be extremely cautious, but unfortunately unhelpful to us. But what I did like was this, Callum, who works with Bob Steele in Dundee, this very nice extrapolation of their data, comparing that with a nice NG12. So what they did was, the original cohort from Craig Moet in 2015, what they did was they reclassified their data and then also did a comparison based on what NG12 would have suggested. So, for example, so this is a nice table they've put here. So based on their criteria, the number of missed cancers, and they use 10 micrograms per gram of feces as their cutoff, would be 3. And we know that because if it isn't all-inclusive, it will miss. So they missed 3. But if you use nice NG12, look at that. That's 10 cancers missed based on that. Interestingly, I found their high-risk adenomas, they actually were missing more using their criteria, but not with the nice NG12. I think that's probably just an anomaly there. But also, I was also intrigued by the fact that they still missed some IBD, 35 using their criteria, but 43 a lot more. If you use the nice NG12, and yes, I know it's not talking about cancer, but as gastroenterologists, we want to pick up these patients with IBD as well, because it's treatable. Yes, it's benign, but it's still treatable, and these patients have got symptoms. So we want to try and have a nice balanced view on how we use a test, not to the point that it completely sidelines everyone else who hasn't got cancer either. And here they put an overall diagnostic table, and here the other additional thing was of course a comparison of the various kits here, but being that we're sponsored by Alpha Labs here, which is fine, but just look at the overall placebo-affective curve data for the various conditions: cancer, colorectal cancer, high-risk adenomas, and also what they group in the final column there, significant colorectal disease, where he adds cancer, high-risk adenomas, inflammatory bowel disease, and I like that, because that's really the important cohort that you really don't want to miss either. Compare that with if you used fit in accordance purely with NG12 criteria, it doesn't perform quite as well, really. And so that's, for me, proof what my instinctively thought as not unhelpful and probably not going to be wise if we're going to follow that criteria to the letter. And I think James is right on the nail on the head, because you've got to give any primary care physicians especially some leeway to make a clinical judgment and stay away from this if they feel the right to do that. So one of my tasks today was actually to put forward some pathways or suggestions for it at least, and I know this is going to be a rather controversial bit. So in Coventry and Warwickshire, gosh, I've been trying very hard to meet with the CCGs and the groups to try and get them to embrace this, and part of it was also dispelling the myth that FIT is the one or the golden child that's actually going to amazingly diagnose colorectal cancer. So I've had 2 meetings just to dispel that myth before even getting down to the nitty-gritty of proposing a pathway. And I'm hoping that they're finally getting convinced about it. So this is something that we've come across. There's 2 pathways I'm putting forward. It's not actually the ideal of what I started off with. If I showed you what I actually started off with, there's about probably 20 slides worth of stuff. This is a compromise, and I think I don't think even my wife will testify. I'm not sure if I've compromised as much as I have with her actually on this arena. But I think it's close to my heart, and I believe it really has great impact. I think FIT really has an impact, and it's got a role, but we've got to find out where that niche is and how we use it correctly. Otherwise we'll get it all wrong, and it'll be a complete mess in 5-10 years time if we use it willy-nilly. So one of the thoughts was, this was the idea of using it in primary care. So the primary care physician sees the patient, yes, he's got lower GI symptoms. They should do some basic blood tests as suggested by the Department of Health guideline, because otherwise they won't know if they're anemic or not. It would be nice if they examine them, and really ideally I'm going to go a step further and even do a rectal examination. And that has sent a few GPs falling off chairs, but nevertheless, those who are still sitting despite that, I said, look, okay, so despite all of that, if they have any of that, just refer them to 2-week wait clinic, okay, because they have got something sinister. But if they haven't got any of that, and thus the group, why didn't you send a stool sample for FIT? And really, for those astute amongst you, will probably realize really that really has niggled it down to really the altar bowel habit. At the end of that, then you either have those who are either positive or negative. The positive again comes straight to the 2-week wait clinic. Now the negative group, now this is the group which I alluded to based on our data, and I hope I'll be interested to see if James has also found this, the 40% that we found that had actually completely, despite so-called fulfilling the criteria for exclusion of cancers, actually had completely normal colonoscopy. Therefore, they didn't have actually any significant pathologies, normal bloods, normal examination, and normal colonoscopy. So we give them the caveat of keeping them in primary care, but if they felt the need to, they can always refer, but through a routine pathway. Now, this is not ideal, but I think it's one of, as I said, this has come through many compromises and conversations with my primary care colleague. The other pathway, which is what we're more likely to be following, which is local to us in Coventry and Warwickshire, again I feel not ideal, but very much similar to this pathway, but you'll see here the consequence of this. Our primary care physicians are very risk averse, quite rightly so. They carry a lot of risk in primary care. So if they feel that despite doing a FIT, it's the FIT negatives that they're really worried about, that we can't seem to reassure them that yes, they may harbour cancer, but the get-out clause that we're providing here is you can still refer them. We're saying, we won't see them, we will see them, but through a routine pathway. They don't need to clog up our urgent 2-week wait, urgent colonoscopies pathway. And then the impact of it in primary and secondary care, and in terms of total number of referrals, etc., and the burdens respectively, which I've tried to highlight there, which is really what I think NICE meant well in what it was trying to achieve, but I think there are 4 caveats here that need to be trying to address. The impact in primary and secondary care, of course, then the burdens in terms of number of referrals and also the number of colonoscopies. And I think at this stage, I'm probably convinced of the fact that I think we just got to get some agreement of some universal sort of pathway, and then get on with it. And that's the only way we can actually truly determine absolute numbers, because otherwise these are just going to be conjectures of postulated numbers of how much we're saving and how many numbers we're going to potentially reduce it, really. So the key, I think, is really, hopefully, and I was hoping that we could get some sort of maybe UK sort of based broad agreement of how we do this. There will be, of course, slight variations, I think, based on local policies and, of course, views by the local CCGs. But if we can broadly agree the groups to do them and then monitor this, I think hopefully then we can get, in the next few years, some data on its true impact of introduction of FIT, that. So really, to summarize, I think I used the term rule out, not to say that to give false reassurance you haven't got cancer, but purely to say that, look, you might have it, but you can have your test routinely. FCP, I think we're all agreed, in this scenario, using it concurrently doesn't add anything, and I sincerely believe that the clinical criteria used by NICE does seem to be revised because it's not practical, and the health economics that we talked about. So I'm just going to end off by thanking, of course, Alpha Labs that helped us with the use of the FIT, BDRF and our various other funding bodies that helps us with this current ongoing study. Thank you very much.